Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors, episode 86.
Welcome to Life by Design, the podcast for chiropractors. Here's your host, Dr. Jamie Richards.
Welcome to Life by Design for Chiropractors. I'm your host, Dr. Jamie Richards, and today we go back in time. This is our first best of episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors. If you've been listening from the start, then it doesn't hurt to hear this episode again. It's really about what is required for you to be successful in a chiropractic practice, or what we deem the 4 requirements of a successful practice. And we walk you through what those requirements are, some different components within those requirements, and I give you an action step at the end that I think will be very valuable and a download to help you audit your own requirements and see where you're at. So enjoy today's episode of Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason in chiropractic. One of the core concepts at Life by Design is this idea of requirements and strategies. And for those who've listened to the Layperson podcast for a long time, you've heard us come back to this over and over and over again, but I think it bears repeating, Cratio.
Sure.
It's not something necessarily that all of our listeners have heard, so I think it's something that we should talk about again. It's what we're going to build today's idea around. Today we're talking about the 4 requirements of successful practice. So let me go back and just talk a bit about, as we developed Life by Design in our own practices, and then it started to grow and morph into other practices and certified offices around the world, one of the concepts that we started to realize was, health is normal. And it being the normal, the caveat here is that in order to achieve that full expression of normality, you have to meet certain requirements. And, this idea of having everything you need in a certain area of need or requirement is really an interesting concept. And we go back to the plant analogy. The normal state of a plant is health. It's these, beautiful, vibrant flowers, and just the garden is designed to be really extraordinary when you look at it. But it doesn't just happen out of nowhere, right? There's processes and mechanisms that are at work, but they require moving parts, if you will. They require pieces. And those pieces are, in the instance of a plant, nutrients, carbon dioxide, sunlight, food, and
you said nutrients.
Yeah, nutrients, water. To apply the chiropractic analogy and how chiropractic comes in, if you take a rock and you stick it up against the base of a stem of a plant, or you impinge or infringe on the ability of the plant to grow normally, then you alter, its physical function. You're basically forcing the plant to adapt and use resources that, without that inhibition there, it wouldn't have to use. And so the same principle applies structurally for the human body, that neurologically and structurally, if that system's not healthy, the neurospinal system, then, that's basically creating a deficiency in neurological health or structural health. And that's taking away from the normal function of the body. And the same thing, food, movement, sleep, all those things. We've even made the case through Think by Design that there's some psychological requirements that can be met. Not just, hey, we got to think positive, but some truly psychological needs for the brain and the mind to be optimized. Vision, purpose, having a plan, building self-esteem, and so on. So here's the thing. Once we started to see that in our practice, and, I think lots of people inherently know that you check for a subluxation, you make a correction, and you see improved physiology. In the third paradigm model, not even looking for necessarily change in collateral damage, symptoms, conditions, just measuring physiology. You're better off not subluxated.
Right.
That is the message.
Yeah.
So you start to see the outcomes of that, and you realize, this is really neat. And then when people start moving better, they meet those requirements, they eat and meet the requirements, they deal with some of the psychological requirements, you really do start to see this overall optimization. You get an idea of the full potential of what the human body is actually designed to do.
Right.
Beyond just, hey, I went to a chiropractor and I'm under chiropractic care, that's great. But yeah, when you move and train and lift and eat well, things, they definitely get amplified, and vice versa. People who are training, moving, and eating well, and then they go ahead and they start corrective care and they optimize their neurological, structural health, they go to an even higher level. So there's an amplification when everything is in place. The point is this: the same principles can be applied not just in business, which we're going to be talking about today, specifically to your chiropractic practice, but they can really be applied anywhere. And that's where I think we started to actually make the first thought was, you could actually apply this to, say, a relationship. Ask yourself, what are the requirements of a healthy relationship?
Or, a relationship that you want.
Well, that's what I'm talking about. I'm talking about specifically your primary relationship, right? You could say, well, I need to time, right? I need to communicate. I need to, understand. So there's these requirements that are there. And if you actually focus on the behaviors and meet the requirements, the outcome is a better relationship.
Right.
So I think it's just a really interesting principle when you apply that everywhere. So it doesn't really matter. Financial abundance, running a business, chiropractic practice, health. So, from the Life by Design for Chiropractors side, we're not talking about a layperson's health. We're talking about the healthier practice.
Right.
And so what we want to discuss is really the foundation for what we're going to be talking about, week after week on Life by Design for Chiropractors, where all of our topics are going to lead to, the categories that they're going to be a part of. And there's hundreds and hundreds and hundreds of detailed components that are in place and in queue for, this podcast and this show. I don't think we're going to be short anytime soon. We've been doing, actually, Chris, you've been doing Life by Design for, I think we're, different media resources. So my best estimate is we're probably around 400 episodes.
Wow, that's pretty cool.
It's pretty cool. We've been doing, almost 6 years.
I'm going to argue that we've actually been doing Life by Design for chiropractors for, how long have we known each other for? Probably since when we first met.
Yeah, since 2008 or 2009. And, there's a lot of the stuff, you even heard this in the first couple episodes, a lot of the stuff that we're talking about on this podcast is just things you've probably heard us talk about before. But I almost feel like we've been in hibernation a little bit to the chiropractic profession.
Well, we're still trying to figure it out.
We've been out and about, and I think we've spent a lot of time and energy and money in figuring this thing out from both a marketing perspective, building great teams, building a great organization, consulting and coaching clients, watching them be successful. Now we have, a lot of case studies of actual individual offices applying these principles and having success.
Right.
And by, success in our terminology, we mean, number one, based on what you want to accomplish. So for one person, successful might mean a 200 visit a week practice that makes X amount of money. And for somebody else, it might mean a 3,000 visit a week practice that makes X amount of money. And again, the second part is the second component of what I just said, and that's profitability.
Yeah.
You're going to hear us discuss a lot from our perspective. We really are moving towards, and our vision for this podcast is to be the voice of reason for chiropractic. Why are we judging our success on the number of visits we have? Why are we judging our success on, a lot of these different criteria?
Yeah, well, and it seems like you're coming to the voice of reason when it comes to chiropractic and business. That's probably the most unreasonable business people on the planet.
Well, we have an amazing product when properly applied, but we have just terrible business practices.
Yeah.
And it'd be interesting to maybe have a conversation about why we have some of those business practices and where some of them came from.
Sure.
But it doesn't really change the fact that we have them, they exist.
And they're hurting people.
They're hurting our practices, and they're hurting you. They're making you less profitable. They're taking away a lot of the enjoyment in your practice. They're increasing your stress. It's amazing the number of calls that I do in a week with people struggling and just, they have all the tools. I shouldn't say that. They don't have the tools. They have one of the tools, which is they have a big vision.
Yeah.
Is probably a better way to think about this. There's tons of vision to go around in chiropractic.
Yep.
But there's a lot of missing pieces in terms of business acumen, marketing, the tools, the capabilities, the strategies. So, the goal here at LBD is to create those tools, strategies, systems, and processes so people can actually bypass a lot of the work, hack their way to success here so they don't have to recreate the wheel. And that's what we've tried to do. So the foundation of it, and we want to lay it down today, is these 4 requirements. We're going to come back to them. We'll go in depth today.
Well, you said, every podcast that we're going to do, it's going to be focusing on.
It's going to be focused on one of these in some way. So let's look at it this way. If you were to look at the requirements of a successful practice, you could make a big laundry list of all the different things that are needed and required.
And are correct.
You got it. And when I say required, I think it's important to think of it in terms of oxygen. Oxygen is a requirement. Sleep is a requirement.
So there's a couple of things we need to talk about this first. That means that this is non-negotiable. A requirement's non-negotiable. You can get really mad at the body, and you can get mad at, if you're religious, you can get mad at God, the fact that He created you, that you need oxygen. But the point is, you need oxygen. You can't wish your need for oxygen away. You can't dream it away. You can't pray it away. You need it no matter what.
Well, one of the really, I think, powerful components of this model and this idea, if you apply this back to chiropractic in your practice, if you're positioning yourself as someone who analyzes for subluxation and corrects subluxation in order to improve and fulfill the normal function of the spine and nervous system, you are positioned in a way where you actually are the best strategy to meet a requirement, because there's no question that a requirement is normal brain and structural health. So a lot of people have this idea, right? Oh, well, I don't like telling people they need chiropractic. Well, that's wonderful, because you don't need chiropractic.
They don't need it.
That's like saying, you need to do CrossFit, or you need to, brush your teeth. You don't need to do any of those things. Each of those things is a strategy to attempt to fulfill one of the requirements. So I think it actually positions us in a place of extreme power, because when we teach our community that, their brain and neurological health and structural health is absolutely vitally important to the overall function of their body, it just so happens that right now, properly applied chiropractic is, the best approach
Only
to
game in town.
With, let's say, movement, for example, a movement requirement, or any of the business requirements we're going to talk about today to run a successful practice, there's multiple potential strategies to accomplish them.
Yep.
Some slightly better than others, in my opinion. But when it comes to the brain and nervous system, there's really only you. I mean, you could make the case that there's other movement components and people who are addressing, say, things like brain gym and other fitness components that do secondarily address the neurological requirements. You're the only person who's specifically looking for the combination of neurological and structural imbalance and attempting to correct it.
Yes.
So really, there's really no competition in that sense. Now, there's competition among you and other providers, and we'll discuss on future episodes how to distinguish yourself from other people, how to identify what is unique about you and communicate that. So these are all things that we're going to keep talking about, and we'll obviously start to build out and give you access to some of the tools and the strategies that we use and have used with a lot of success. The key here is that in your practice, you can really narrow it down to 4 requirements: team, leadership, communication, and systems. And as we mentioned, there's lots of other ones, but all of those, Cratio, can fit into one of those categories.
Those are the principles.
You got it. I mean, you could make the case for mastery, or, say, technique and being a technician in your practice.
Yeah.
I think that probably is a requirement. But we're not going to get too much into that on the podcast. As long as you're analyzing for subluxation, irregardless of symptoms or condition, in an objective way, delivering some type of application in hopes to correct some type of imbalance, and then you're remeasuring, then you are practicing in what we would consider a third paradigm model.
I would agree.
If you are checking someone because they have a symptom or condition only, and using the symptom and condition as the primary criteria for, where a force gets applied, now you're outside the third paradigm. You're practicing in a second paradigm chiropractic, attempting to get sick people well. And I would make the case, and you'll hear us comment on this a lot, that's not real chiropractic. That's not our chiropractic. That's not where chiropractic needs to go.
That's also the chiropractic that legitimately gets chiropractors in trouble.
You got it. It's the chiropractic we've been, not we, but the profession has generally been practicing as in the large part for the last 100 years.
Sure, and it
doesn't work.
Slowly eating away at our market share and our reputation.
You got it. It doesn't take long in practice to realize that chiropractic doesn't get sick people well. Lots of sick people who come into your practice and become less subluxated get well, but lots of sick people continue to get more sick, even unsubluxated.
Right.
People continue to get more sick, even unsubluxated, eating great food and moving.
Yeah.
Right. There's lots of other factors at play. So all we can really say to people is that if you meet the requirements, you will have the best opportunity to fulfill whatever the expression of your optimization looks like and what it is.
Well, yeah. Well, a great example of this online is always when, and it's unfortunate every time, but when something happens to a really solid, popular, successful paradigm 2 chiropractor, there's like this. There's almost a shock within the profession. I don't understand how this happened. He was subluxation free, or she was subluxation free. Well, being subluxation free doesn't guarantee you health.
It just means he's better or she's better.
Yeah.
You got it. So the same is going to be true for your practice is, you have to meet all of these requirements, and the closer you are at approximating them, and you know what, understand this is a lifelong process. If you've ever run a business before, and if you're listening to the show, either you're a chiropractor, you have an interest in chiropractic, or maybe just business in general, or maybe you're a chiropractic student or chiropractic staff. The longer you're in business, the more you realize just how much there is to do. And, we love the concept of working on your business versus working in your business. It's a lot of fun when you actually dig into this, checking and correcting. We're taught in school, even if you go to a school that teaches that, you're taught that that's what being a chiropractor means. And sure, if you can have someone else run your business for you and not have to
5% for most chiropractors though,
then that's fine. But for the most part, your business success is going to be dependent on you meeting these other requirements that are non-technician based.
Yeah, working on the business, like you said.
You got it. So let's talk about what some of those requirements are. And what we're going to do, guys, is in the show notes, we're actually going to give you a really cool graphic. Just go to the show notes and download that. It's going to be at lifebydesignforchiropractors.com/podcast. Find today's episode and you'll see the graphic there. It's called a requirements and strategies graph, and it will show you how these 4 requirements look. And when you implement them, it'll give you just the visual idea of how these lead towards an optimized practice. And on the other side of the graph, what you're going to see is what most chiropractors do. Instead of meeting the requirements, just like people with health, somebody wants to get healthy, what's the first thing they do? I need to stop drinking coffee, or I need to stop eating sugar. I need to stop.
Yeah, the pebbles, right? The small things.
You got it. So we want to focus on the rocks. Okay, we want to focus.
Why don't you talk about that analogy? Because I don't think everyone knows. I've used that analogy a bunch, and most people don't know. First of all, unfortunately, most people don't even know who Stephen Covey is.
Yeah, great analogy. So if you don't know Stephen Covey, lots of great books, but 7 Habits of Highly Effective People,
successful,
is a great one, and you can find that on Amazon anywhere. There's lots of great books. So he talks about the rocks and the sand, and so imagine you have a jar, and laid out on the table in front of your jar are these big rocks, pebbles, and then sand. And the analogy is the rocks are the most important things in your life. Family, career.
Whatever your values
are. They're your biggest ones. And then the pebbles are the next tier down, and then the sand is just the small stuff. And so what most people do is they put in the sand, and then they put in the pebbles, and then they try and jam in the rocks. If you've ever tried this example, it's very difficult to get the rocks in.
So remember we used to talk about in practice. So one of the things I don't know why you were always concerned about this at the beginning, but knowing your practice, one of the things you were always doing is you were always writing a new newsletter.
Right.
That's a great example of, newsletter's fine.
Yeah, it's a pebble.
But considering the problems you had in your practice early on,
you got it.
It was far from important.
Yeah, I thought the solution was a new newsletter, a new fee system, change the hours up. I had a lot more.
Do a new screening.
Right. Yeah, I had a lot bigger problems than that.
You got it. Me too. Me too, but I'm just thinking it applies really well to this example.
Yes. And that's why I didn't have practice success, until, 6 or 7 years into practice. So, the rocks are the most important thing. So if you reverse this example and you actually put the rocks in first, then put the pebbles, and then the sand fills in the rest. Once I did that, I started to become even more successful. And it's just gone up and up and up and up. And it's been great because my focus now, and I know same thing for you, Crayshow, my focus now is on the rocks, right? What needs to be in place. And these requirements we're talking about today, these constitute the rocks in your practice.
Right.
Leadership, team, communication, and systems. So if you were to meet all these or meet them to 80 or 90% even, you would see a massive, massive change in the profitability of your practice and the happiness, the joy, the emotional reward that comes along with actually meeting these values versus the struggle and the pain and just the horror that happened. I don't know about you, but man, Mondays were not fun.
Well, I think what's interesting from what you're saying is your success metric is profitability and happiness.
Right.
Your success metric is not you're going to be seeing 5,000 people.
That's right. You got it.
Because we know
profitability and happiness.
We know lots of successful. We know lots of successful. I'm making the air quotes.
Yeah.
500 a week, 600 a week chiropractors that weren't even paying their bills. Their family was starving, and they were not having a lot of fun.
You got it. And we've seen that in some of the coaching calls we've done and the consulting we've done with different offices, and it's horrifying. If you were just to take it on the face value, I see 500 visits a week. Wow, good job, man. That's great.
Yeah. Well,
how much money do you make? Well,
what's your per visit fee?
You got it. Well, it's $6 or $10 or $13. We can barely pay.
We can't. We can't feed a family.
You got it. Right. So that's a problem. What's the Garfield quote? I love Mondays.
I love lasagna.
Neighbors, if you haven't seen Neighbors, that's great. So it gets a lot better actually when you have kids, right?
That's one of the best quotes.
Yeah, so Neighbors was actually a lot funnier after we had Andy. So I watched it once before, died laughing, love Seth Rogen, and watched it again after kids. Much fun.
Dying, that was good, Jamie.
Love lasagna.
I love Mondays.
So let's talk about what the requirements and the strategies are.
And let's talk about some of the subcategories.
Sure. Well, let's start with leadership.
Sure.
So, I'm going to give credit where credit is due here. The first thought that I ever had in this area really was a quote that I heard from Arnold Bernier.
Sure.
When he said, "Who you are as a person precedes who you are as a chiropractor."
Right.
And that was really, I think, a powerful thought for me because it made me move into a direction where I started paying a lot more attention to who I was,
right,
how I was being, what my values were, and just as importantly, the virtues that I wanted to have in order to accomplish the values.
Yeah, well, what he's saying is you're an individual before you're a chiropractor. Right?
You got it.
Or before you're a father, or before you're a husband,
exactly,
or before you're a parent, or whatever it is. You're a person first.
Yeah.
So figure your own stuff out.
You got it.
Right? And then you can start applying it much better and easier to everything else that you do in your life.
Yes. So leadership, what are some of the subcategories here of leadership, Cracio?
Having a clear vision, knowing what you want for your community, knowing how you're going to go about attaining it, knowing who you want to be working with, right? Knowing how you're going to solve the obstacles, knowing, who you want to be talking to, right? Going back, you always give me credit for this quote. I don't know if I said it first or not. You can't be everybody's chiropractor.
Right.
So knowing who you want to be a chiropractor to is going to help you lead that group of people.
Right. And then leadership skills that go along with that. Right, some of those virtues from drive, ambition, focus, and productivity.
What you're gonna find. Sorry to interrupt you. Is as we're going through these, there's a ton of overlap. Right, that's why they're just categories.
Right. Well, and what we want to really get across here today is really the bare bones. It's really the definitions of what those categories and requirements are.
Well, today is here's the most important thing from today's episode. I think you can correct me if you disagree. I think you want to start looking at your practice in these categories, and if you really notice a gap in one of these massive categories, you need to say this is a requirement, and I'm not doing a strategy that's effective, so I need to change this.
At the end of today's episode, we're going to give you a couple of things. As I said, I'm going to give you the requirements and strategies graph, but I'm also going to give you an assignment. And part of that assignment is to identify where your greatest deficiency is. And that's going to give you a starting point. And if you don't have a tool in order to figure that out, then I'm also going to give you a tool in order to figure that out. So, we're really dedicated, Cracio, and there's a reason why this project, Life by Design for Chiropractors, has taken a long time to launch. And I know we talked earlier in the pre-show how, Mike and I are both, very much perfectionists, and we want to wait till everything's absolutely perfect. And, Cracio, and there's ups and downs to both of them.
Nobody listens to Cracio when it comes to this, though, because Mike is too stubborn.
There's ups and downs to both of these, but, Cracio is like, let's just get this out and let's figure it out and we'll tweak it as we go. And this is a project that, Mike and I trumped Cracio on. So we've been waiting.
Most of them.
We've been waiting and waiting. And so, this project is one where we're very, very committed to working with chiropractors and helping this profession. We really want to bring the level of reasonability that, we've created at Life by Design. That's become a trademark, really, of the message that we put out. And we want to create tools and actual products that people can use in their practices to get results.
Yeah.
We don't want to just get on here and talk about concepts, which is great. You pop it on your, on your iPhone, you listen to it in the car. This can be your, kind of your pregame warm up, driving to the office. Wonderful. And this will be a great benefit to you and value. But where this is really going to, hit the road and action is going to happen and results are going to come out from that is when you implement some of the things we're going to give you.
And ultimately, an implementation, it's really easy to listen and to agree, but implementation is where the most successful people are the best.
It's where it's at.
And where if you're having trouble, maybe intellectually, I know in my life, intellectually, I was always really solid on most things. It was when it came time to actually put them into play and hold myself accountable.
Well, this is where leadership as a requirement actually starts to become a big factor. So, let's skip past leadership and come back. So if you look at some of the other ones, team, communication, systems, very, very important. But let's say you have those absolutely perfectly laid out, at least.
Or decently, yeah.
The problem is, without the leadership component developed, you won't action them. You won't implement them because your self-esteem is suppressed.
You got it.
You don't feel like you're good enough. You don't feel like you have the tools.
You don't feel like they're ready enough.
You're scared. You don't want to take a risk. So these are all topics that we're going to discuss. I'm getting actually really excited for what's coming up down the line here. But this is a big problem in our profession. Is there's a reason why people go for the shiny penny.
Yeah, right. It's going to be easy.
It's the quickest, easiest thing to do. And this is one of those professions. And I'm not sure there's a lot of other ones where you don't have to be very good to be generally profitable and have a relatively solid living, right? You can see your 50 people a week and charge a decent per visit fee. And as long as your overhead is reasonable, you're going to walk away and you're going to make your six figures and life's going to be good.
Yeah.
Except you never actually ran a successful business.
Well, I mean, I think
let's change that. You never actually ran an optimal business.
Well, you never ran what you. I mean, here's the point. And again,
unless that's what you want.
Thank you.
Still not optimal. That's why I changed it to successful.
It's funny how I never even had to say anything. You know what I was going to say.
Well, we've finished a lot of sentences.
If that's your definition of success, great, and more power to you.
But what we're saying is that's not reaching the full potential of what that business could be.
Well, sure, and that's also not necessarily the people that we want to be talking to. We want to be talking to chiropractors who love and are passionate about chiropractic and making a big change in their community and the people's lives in their community.
Yes, and those that either practice in a third paradigm or want to.
Yeah.
We work with a lot of people who are transitioning. A lot of our clients lately have been offices who've listened in for a couple of years to the main podcast.
Yep.
And they have, maybe used some of the online products, done some of the communication courses, things like that.
Yep.
And, generally they'll say, wow, like this is incredible stuff. This is how I want to do it. I just don't know how to do it.
Right.
And I'm just seeing the challenge. So we're trying to bridge that gap for you over the course of the podcast, week in and week out. So we talked about leadership. The second one that we're going to discuss here, Cratio, as a requirement is team.
Sure.
This is one I think we can intimately talk about because for the most part, it took both of us a lot of years before we actually realized we needed a team.
Yeah, well, I mean, one of the ways I wanted to bring my overhead down was by not hiring people.
Well, you did too many things that I did.
Yeah, I know.
Essentially.
I was a dummy for following you, but here we are. But yeah, you start to think, well, I can probably do this better, and it it's just ridiculous.
Yeah, well, now you can laugh about it, obviously. And I think about, for example, we were just talking yesterday. I just got the payroll, came in for my staff, and one single staff had done a 2-week cycle. They had worked 109 hours.
Right, she's working more full time.
Then she's 53 hours a week. Just what if that was me? Right, trying to do 109 hours in 2 weeks on top of everything else.
One of the principles here is leverage, right? And building, one of the cool things that building a team does is and you hit the nail on the head without talking about the principle. It gets you to focus on the things that you're good at and that you should be doing, while other people focus on things that they're good at and they should be doing.
Let's talk about this concept, because I think a lot of people, I do get a question a lot in terms of, hey, that sounded really great. Did you guys come up with that? I think there's not a ton of new ideas in the world. There's lots of recycled ones, newly applied, different paradigms.
Sure.
So people always want to know, who are our mentors? Who are people that we've applied information from? And you're talking about a concept from Dan Sullivan.
Yeah.
Not Dan Sullivan, the chiropractor. Nope. Shout out to Dan.
But both Dans are awesome.
Yeah. But we're talking about Dan Sullivan from Strategic Coach. So, you're going to hear us talk a lot about Strategic Coach.
Because they've been big influencers of us.
Great company. We've done coaching with Strategic Coach. Dan Kennedy is another influence, Cratio.
Sure. A lot of marketing guys. Dan Kennedy, Joe Polish, Gary Halbert.
Yeah. So we just want to, acknowledge that, we are chronic learners. We are chronically investing a lot of money in working with the best coaches and making sure that we're integrating concepts, developing new concepts. And I think where we're strong, Cratio, and what, our listeners and our clients are going to see is that developing the tools.
Sure.
See, the tools are one of those things that will be unique to us because we're making tools for chiropractic.
Yeah, for this profession.
And that's the thing. And we set this this project up. We said we want to be specifically focused on creating tools and processes and systems for chiropractors,
Right.
for third paradigm chiropractors,
Right,
for
even more specific.
and that don't exist right now. So that's something that I'm really proud of that we've been able to do, and I'm actually extremely stoked to get these out to the profession as we keep going forward. So
Sure.
we're talking about team.
Yes.
You're talking about this concept of unique ability from Dan Sullivan.
Yep. So again, what it does is when you hire people, and this was shocking for me to learn that there's actually people who love to do, they would consider their uniqueness things that I hate doing.
It's crazy.
Right? Like you were saying.
Because it goes in reverse. There's things you love to do that I can't believe you want to sit there and do. So I'm more than happy to let you do them.
You got it. And that's, we can use life by design. We were just talking about this yesterday as we were leaving dinner. The fact of the matter is we all play a very vital and different role in this company. And
there's not a lot of crossover either, which I find interesting.
Well, it's actually the opposite. The further that we go, the more unique and the more specialized we're all getting. And
considering how closely aligned our values are.
Well, and we see where the gaps are. And when it comes time to hire, our first team member at Life by Design, we'll know where to hire.
Right. Yes. Well, we have an idea of what needs to be filled.
Right.
And that's the point with your project in your own office.
Right. So a very simple strategy if you're looking to add a team member to your office is, what do I hate doing? How much of it do I have to do? And who could do this better than I can?
You got it. I believe it was Robin Sharma who said, if you can find someone who can do what you do at 80% or better, hire them.
Yeah.
Now, let me just speak up here because I know the conversation that's going on in a lot of the listeners' heads.
Sure.
And that's, I don't want to spend money on hiring somebody.
Sure. Oh,
I could do that.
You got
I
it.
only know because that's my whole conversation that goes on inside my head. And my wife Dana is constantly saying, why don't you hire somebody to do that? And I always have an excuse. Well, I can do it better, or, I'd have to teach them how to do it.
Right.
Because you have the same conversations in your head.
Sure.
And so if you're having that, we're not saying you go and you hire a massive team, so you only have to show up and, deliver a thrust. You have 27 employees and
if you can do that, that's
and
awesome.
$1 million payroll.
Right.
But we're saying you need to know what those things are that are unique to you. What's your idea of your dream practice? Do you like spending more time working on your business versus in it? Then start to structure things so you're spending more time working on your business.
Right.
Hire an associate, train them. You know what I mean? It may not happen today, but you need to map this out. So in 4 years, 2 years, 5 years, whatever the timeline is, you end up moving towards the application that's going to make you happy. So when it comes to team, there is absolutely a optimal hiring process, and there's lots of different strategies. So whether you use the Life by Design hiring process, which we have developed, or a handful of other ones, there's some commonalities among the best ones that you'll see. And then the time comes down the road when Dr. Mike allows us to release the hiring process. You'll see some of those in the Life by Design system.
Thanks, Dad.
You'll be hearing from Dr. Mike soon on some future podcasts. And we'll talk a bit more about some of these concepts and maybe share with you just some of the foundations of the hiring process. Mike was integral in creating the process, so I'll save that up for him to talk about on one of the episodes.
He's the best to cover it for sure.
Yeah, his unique ability is the day-to-day operations and handling, the systematic organizational strategies for Life by Design.
Keeping us bozos in check.
Speak for yourself, Cratio.
Whatever, Jamie.
Okay. So when you're thinking of team, I want you to just start thinking of what your unique abilities are and what the gaps are in your business.
Right.
And think about what would it be like if I hired somebody who did these other things. How would that make me feel?
Sure.
Would I be excited about that?
And always think of hiring people. There should be a list. If I were to ask you if you had, if an opening opened up today, who would you hire? Who would you want? Where are they?
Right.
You should always have a list of people.
You got it.
That are next in your company
Okay,
to hire.
now we're getting into strategies. We'll talk about those later, Cratio.
See how they bleed over?
This is going to be a 4-hour podcast. Let's go into the next one. The third one is communication.
Sure.
This is one that you and I both love. We're very passionate about communication, and we're going to spend a lot of time on this. So
I would actually argue that communication is one of your unique abilities.
Yeah, I would agree with you.
Yeah.
I find joy in coming up with new ways to communicate concepts so people understand them, integrate them, and not just the material itself and the content, but I really enjoy the behavioral and psychological aspect of how to communicate to people and how to have them hear it and understand it.
Yep. So again, the principle with this one is you want to communicate your unique product or service in a way that people that you want to be talking to find it absolutely irresistible.
You got it. And that's something that in the beginning was difficult. I think we both grew our practices to the measly size that they were based on just passion and that passion to share something with our community and not really realizing that it would be much more sought after and paid for if we actually talked about it in a way that they
cared about.
You got it.
Yeah.
So we're going to spend a lot of time on developing your avatar, creating your categories, finding out what people in your market actually love
or even
what they want to know about.
Sure. I mean, even the biggest tip I can give you today is stop talking about chiropractic and start framing chiropractic in a way that people care about it.
You guys, so we'll talk about this concept of positioning and how to position yourself properly without compromising, because this is where, the Life by Design model is so powerful. People get into this trap where they've always wanted to practice this way. Because I think everybody, I've just never talked to a person who checks for subluxation who wouldn't want a practice full of people who came to get checked for subluxation.
And only that.
So do we have people who have collateral damage, lots of symptoms, conditions? Absolutely. But people in our practices talk about getting checked. They talk about coming to have checkups. They talk about their structural function.
And
they talk about what their last test results.
And they don't whine or complain when it doesn't change.
You got it. Very rarely. We'll have people who, at their annual reviews have no change in symptomatic state, condition, maybe even feel worse, but are absolutely on board with getting checked consistently over their lifetime for them and their family.
You got it.
And, that might sound crazy. It might sound so far-fetched, but I'm going to tell you, it's extremely doable, and it's actually a lot simpler than you probably think that it is. It's not easy. It takes a lot of work, and it's going to be difficult to do, but it's very, very doable.
Sure, and it's fun.
So the last one is systems. This is one that, Mike really is the expert on this. In creating them, I'd like to say, and I'm proud actually to say that, I've definitely ramped up my game in terms of systems thanks to Mike over the last, say, 3 years. He made me realize that I didn't have any systems and I needed them. So I've taken this on as a really big gap. So when we give you the homework assignment for today, this was my gap.
Yeah.
Right? This was my deficiency in my practice is I had no systems. I didn't have a team either.
Well, you always thought that, you had to do things different or better. But the truth of the matter is, and what successful businesses do is they find a formula that works.
You got it.
They find out what percentage it works at. If they're happy with that percentage, they just multiply that over and over
That's
again.
right. And that's what we've done is I've spent time researching, interviewing people who had great systems, both starting with Dr. Mike and then moving through different people in and outside of the profession, working with coaches, as we said, like Dan Sullivan and Dan Kennedy, and working through these other programs, realizing that, we can take this to just an extremely detailed, systematized level and then simplify the whole process without losing the essence of third paradigm chiropractic. In fact, really strengthening it and putting it up on a pedestal.
Of course.
So, that's what we've done. And now I've spent the last 2 years coaching clients through the same process. So we'll talk about some case studies. We'll bring some of these clients on and we'll have them share their best strategies, things they've implemented, things that worked, some of the things that didn't work for them, and how we overcame those as a team and put those together. So guys, here's your homework assignment. We've talked about the 4 requirements for successful practice, which are leadership, team, communication, and systems. And you need to meet those requirements to as large a degree as possible. So step 1 is figuring out where your greatest deficiency is. As I mentioned, my greatest deficiency was in systems. Krisha, what do you think your greatest deficiency was?
How did you know that, Jamie? I think that's a really important question. If you're going to give them homework, I think it's important that they know, how to realize that.
Okay, so there's 2 ways to know it. One, from a purely objective way, you need to have statistics. So you need to, number 1, track what's happening
Numbers,
in your practice.
facts.
You got it, facts. So
reality.
We use something called the success surveillance system. I'll put a link to that in the show notes, and you can see if that's something that applies to you. I think it's incredible. It's tailored to every chiropractic practice, but it gives you all the detailed statistics that you need.
Well, it shows. Here's the most important thing: is it actually will give you numbers on where you're weakest at.
You got it. Where people are dropping out, how you're converting.
Where you're not converting.
You got it. All of those detailed statistics. So you need to be able to measure and track, hence the idea of success surveillance system. You got to monitor it. So, I had some basic fundamental stats, not to this degree. This is, more statistics on steroids, but I knew that something was wrong. Right. 1, my numbers were actually relatively decent. I always had a decent volume, but I wasn't collecting the right amount of money. I was really compromising my fee systems. And I realized that 1, I didn't have systems around fees. 2, I didn't have a way to communicate the value, not just in words, but more of a sales funnel.
Sales.
You got it. So a system. So I didn't have a system around the sales process. Day 1 was, here's what we do. It's amazing. You need it. Let's get going.
Right.
And, that works in some cases. And then I didn't have a long-term retention-based system other than my passion.
Right.
So when I recognized that, and then I saw Mike's manual that was 500 pages, and I saw mine that was non-existent,
right.
I realized systems were my greatest deficiency.
Right.
So I think you're going to realize, you may know what your greatest deficiency is, Cratio, by what your greatest strengths are. So I knew communication was good,
Yep.
and I knew leadership was good and developing.
Right.
So I knew it had to be either team or systems. I knew team was a problem.
Yep.
But then I made a decision that systems was the greater deficiency.
A bigger problem.
You got it. So that's the homework assignment, guys. I want you to get the graph, download the graph, and I want you to circle what your greatest deficiency is, what area it is, and I want you to grade yourself. So on this graph, you can take a pen and you can just print it out, put it at your station in your office, put it on the whiteboard, and take a pen and give yourself a score in each of those 4 areas, okay? When you do that, you can then get an idea of what your overall practice function is, if you will, and then realize your greatest deficiency. And then just note that. And as you listen to the show week by week by week, I want you to pay extra attention to the area where your greatest deficiency actually is.
Right.
Awesome. You've been listening to Life by Design for Chiropractors, the voice of reason for chiropractic.